Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started then. Uh, Good morning, good afternoon, good day, wherever you are. My name is Emily Swafford. I am Director of Academic and Professional Affairs here at the American Historical Association. I'm coming to you live from DC, Washington, DC. And I want to welcome you to Fine-Tuning Program Outcomes, a curriculum mapping workshop. I'm particularly excited that we're able to offer this workshop this year. It was envisioned as a follow-up to our charrette workshop that we have every year at our annual meeting. So a shout out to those of you who were with us last week, and another shout out to those of you who are joining us anew. We're really pleased that you're all here for the conversation. I want to also, if you can see her, give a quick recognition to Laura McEnany. She is our Vice President of the Teaching Division. She serves on the AHA Council. She's also a professor at Whittier College in California. And her enthusiasm is something that keeps us all going. And I just want to make sure you all know that she's here to join us for this workshop. So I just want to cover a few logistical concerns, and then I'll turn it over to the workshop facilitators. You should have been muted when you were admitted to the meeting. Please stay muted until you're talking, in the breakout groups. But if you run into any technical issues, please use the chat box, and AHA staff will be there to help you. There's several of us who are going to be behind the scenes for this workshop. The first part of the webinar or of this workshop will be recorded. There's a brief presentation with slides. So just an FYI that will be recorded, and that recording will be made available to you after the workshop. And a quick reminder that by registering and or participating in the AHA's web-based events, participants and panelists agree to abide by the AHA's Code of Professional Conduct, and that should be appearing in the chat. And a brief request as well, if you could change your Zoom name to say your real name, that'll help us in assigning the breakout groups. And also if you could put your institutional affiliation, that will also help everybody identify each other as you're in the breakout groups. But I think that is everything that I needed to cover. And so I will go ahead and mute myself and turn it over to John Savajan, who will kick it off on behalf of the facilitators.
Thank you, Emily. Greetings, everybody. Very excited that we finally got this going. It was a long time in coming, and we're really excited to see a great crowd here. And we're going to start off, as Emily mentioned, with a bit of a PowerPoint, a couple of context setting for what we're going to do. But the majority of our time is going to be spent in breakout rooms where we're going to have you practicing and talking about mapping of curriculum. So that's, I'm going to start by sharing the screen, and hopefully I'll know what I'm doing here. Okay. So I wanted to introduce the folks, and I thought the people on the list here can just go ahead and introduce themselves. Charles, go ahead.
I'm Charles Ford. I'm Professor of History and Director of the Quality Enhancement Plan at Norfolk State University in Norfolk, Virginia. And I'm here to talk about the Gen Ed, mapping Gen Ed surveys and program outcomes and curriculum mapping, and how useful it's been at Norfolk State.
And Norman?
Hi, I'm Norm Jones. I'm a Professor Emeritus of History at Utah State University. Emeritus meaning out and he deserved it, but I'm here because I've spent a great deal of my career working on curriculum mapping. My department was one of the first in the United States to actually be tuned, and I've been very engaged in those kinds of activities ever since, and I'm very much engaged in national conversations about general education and assessment. So that's, I guess, why I'm invited to here. Thank you.
And Nancy?
Hi, I'm Nancy Kwon Wickham. I'm a professor of history at Cal State Long Beach. I'm a member of the original tuning group, as are all the others in this group. And I bring to this work a pretty significant background in assessment of student learning. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you today.
Thank you. I'm John Savajan, and I'm a professor of history at Alverno College, which has been involved with competency-based development of learning outcomes for close to 40 some years now. I haven't been there that long, but I've been involved with this assessment process since I came on. And I'm also one of the folks beginning with the tuning process back in 2012, I believe is when we began. I'm very excited to be here. And Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Schertz from Bergen Community College in New Jersey. And I was also one of the original tuners and sort of followed that lead into working with the charrette alongside several of the other people on this workshop. And I'm just, I'll probably primarily be looking at the connection between what you do in the classroom, the assignments, and the course goals that you have, and then how those course goals then relate to your program goals. We'll all be able to talk about all the levels of the chain here, but that's where I'll sort of share what I've been doing in the classroom. All right, that's it.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So, and Sarah alluded to this, and so did Emily, that this part of comes out of the charrette experience for many people. And a lot of us have participated in the design of assessments or classroom exercises and how they relate to course outcomes. And we thought that it would be really important now to take it another step further and move beyond the course itself and to see how that connects to not only the course outcomes, but the program outcomes and the relationship then even to the institutional ones. And so that's where this kind of came about. We thought it was a natural progression from talking about tuning in the classroom. So that's one of the first goals of this, or outcomes of this workshop, was to help you understand that relationship. And we want to be able to help folks see how their courses do connect well, whether they do or not. And we want to give people a chance to practice doing that today. So this is kind of a working session, although you're going to listen to a few of us talking in the beginning. So this is kind of the layout for the process. We're going to spend about 20 minutes just talking about mapping. We'll put you in breakout rooms. At that point, you can introduce yourselves and get to know each other a little bit. And every one of us will be moderators in those rooms to help the process along. You'll have time to do either personal, or maybe if you're with another person or with a team, you can do your mapping at that time. And then we'll return the last 10 minutes to the larger room. We'll get some observations from the moderators and we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So I'm going to turn this over to Sarah to talk a little bit about the tuning project. And I think Norm might also want to participate in this as well, but Sarah?
Sure. I was going to pick up really with the idea of tuning at the very basic level in the classroom, and to sort of talk about the process that we as faculty engage in when we talk about tuning, and then Norm's going to pick it up and carry us on into the larger setting with the institutional tuning and the connection that he has. And I had a whole set of beautiful notes that I was trying to get to, and there we go. This way it'll keep me a little bit more on task. When we talk about tuning, and again, Norm will do a significantly better job with this. He is sort of our godfather of tuning. But the way I like to think about it is to develop this sort of set of guidelines and recommendations for ways of thinking and for core competencies and skills that we think define history as a unique field of study, as a unique discipline. And so thinking about the discipline that way, being very explicit about what we think students are going to get out of this study, it helps us to really start to define our learning outcomes for our programs, for our courses, for our classes, our classroom assignments and activities. And so that's really this connection that I see between tuning and what we're doing today, which is this idea of mapping, that we're really looking at what history students can be said to have achieved or learned when they leave our courses, when they leave our programs, and when they move on to the next level of study. And so that really helped our department at Bergen start to reconceptualize our program learning goals, our course learning goals, And then one of the things, again, that today we will be looking at, especially if you came from the charrette, but just as a general practice, will be to see how we can then tune or connect these course learning goals to our actual assignments and our assessments, so that we're really helping students to achieve what we think we're teaching them. So that's really sort of this link that I see with tuning. In general, the message of tuning was what you think is intuitive really needs to be made explicit to your students, to the general public. And oftentimes I think, especially with assignments and assessments, we're very used to doing what we always did, which is, we do a test, we do a paper, we do a research activity, we do a class discussion, but we don't really explicitly tell students what we're hoping that they learn from this activity or assignment. And we may not even think about whether or not we're achieving those learning goals with our students ourselves. So the idea of mapping is, at least at that level, is going to be to help make very clear these connections that we see between what we're doing and what we say students are learning, to really be able to literally draw lines between an assignment or an assessment and the goal that we have for that course. So that's sort of where I see tuning helping me to connect with this curriculum mapping concept. So I will let Norm take over at this point, though.
Well, now that I've been declared the godfather of tuning, I'm really kind of disturbed. If you don't tune, something terrible may happen. Well, thank you, Sarah. And I just wanted to reiterate one of the key points of what tuning is about, which is that we are constantly asking ourselves, what do we want our students to know, understand, and be able to do? And that conversation began with when they have a history degree. But once you've said, well, at the end of the degree, what do they have to know, understand, and be able to do? You are then confronted with the question of how did they get there? And so that's why you have to map the curriculum. To properly tune your curriculum, you have to know what's going to happen where. And that also means, and who's responsible for seeing to it that they can do the things that we promised they can do when they graduate. So that's one of the reasons this has been such a great exercise for historians, is that we do have an unarticulated curriculum in every sense, but especially because we don't often say, when you do this, it's going to go over here and then it's going to help you do this. And with tuning, you can do that. You don't have to say you must take this, this, and this in this order like they do in the sciences, but you can say this is what we are building toward, and we know where that building is going to occur and who's going to do it. So it's tuning, and the mapping that goes with it is a really important activity that changes, I think, everyone's teaching, because they begin to see themselves as part of the organic whole of the curriculum. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah and Norm. I think what I want to do here is talk a little bit about some of the resources that you have available to you, and that you'll probably you can access them through the Google Docs link that was provided ahead of time. So hopefully you do have access to these. Let us know if you don't. Just wanted to point out that there are some templates that we want you to be able to access and use. We will talk a little bit about the QED in a minute. The faculty and degree qualification profiles are there, as well as this PowerPoint. So there are a variety of materials that you'll have available to you. This is a basic map that we put out on the front page. And I just wanted to point out to you that this is essentially a simple way of developing a certain coherence to your program. And it is not rocket science. It just takes a lot of thinking and a lot of conversation. And it's a great way for departments to come together and talk about their outcomes and what they're teaching and where they're teaching and where are some of the gaps in what they're teaching. And that's one of the best things that can come out of this process. I like to use this slide because it walks you through essentially what I call the continuum of increasing specificity. Because when you've got institutional outcomes, they tend to be or should be very generic. They should be designed for people in different disciplines and departments to take those outcomes and translate them into their own program outcomes. And so when you see the program outcomes here, that's where we all tend to sit as history departments. But we also should have criteria for how are those program outcomes being met. And that tends to be translated down into the coursework that we're doing. And so as we continue to move closer towards the assignment or the assessment, we're going to become much more specific in what we're asking our students to do. And so typically we all start down here in the classroom. That's where we're practitioners. And we want to be able to be there and be with our students and know our students. But at some point along the way, when we have program outcomes, we have to figure out a way that those are all connected. This is an example from my mapping that I did. In my school, every one of our departments needs to produce at least one of these to show how the process has been thought through. So you'll see the Alverno institutional outcomes over on the left-hand side. We call them abilities. There are 8 of them. But you can see they're pretty generic: communications, analysis, problem solving, social interaction, developing a global perspective, effective citizenship, civic engagement. Those are articulated. And then we in the history department pulled out the ones that we found most important for our discipline. And that was communication, analysis, and developing a global perspective, and valuing the decision-making. Now we've got 4, we used to have 3. So the outcomes that we've identified here and we've articulated as a department are informed by the institutional outcomes, but there are particular spin on it. So when I get down to my classroom, then I've taken them and further developed them into what I'm expecting in my course on American history. And so I've got 4 outcomes for the course. And then there's an assessment that I put in here, which is an example of what they're doing. The criteria is where I'm linking the performance that the students do on the assessment to the course outcomes, which then link back to the program outcomes. At Alverno, we always have our students do self-assessment before they get feedback. So that's an important part of our process. And then the feedback itself. So this is an example of a concept map. And there's a template, if you're interested, that basically has these areas open to you, and you can plug in or you can cut and paste your outcomes and then line them up. And I just put in little arrows. You can use paper and pencil and do the same results. Charles, I think this is a chance for you to talk a little bit about the certification process.
Yes, at Norfolk State, as part of our accreditation, as part of the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, Commission on Colleges, we have to do a QEP, and we've done 2 of them actually. And our first QEP was on critical thinking. It had these broad institutional goals of reflection, evaluation, argumentation, solving problems, obtaining information, and networking between disciplines, or the acronym REASON, right? REASON. And that was a very comprehensive plan. And of course, each discipline had to translate that, and then also to justify and their traditional holdings within the Gen Ed core. And history at Norfolk State had always been very privileged. We had two courses within the core, but we had to justify why they were there, how they were connected to other courses, and how they met these reason goals in historical thinking. And it was very, very useful. And we came up with, the institution came up with a very general set of questions, and then specific questions for each discipline to justify their role in the Gen Ed core and the building of sequencing of information, of specificity of information and skills, particularly critical thinking skills. And we're doing that also right now with our second QEP, our Quality Enhancement Plan, which looks at, it's called Close Reading for Effective Writing, CREW. And it looks at why students can't critically think. Well, they can't read closely. And then they need effective writing before they can then think. And that's, so So out of that, we saw the deficiencies there. We had to address those deficiencies before we do those. And then that further changed our program outcomes and refined our assignments and assessments as well to make sure that students could read something very closely, whether it's a history class, physics class, social work class, business class, but use some of the history thinking into those classes too. So there was a cross-fertilization via the certification process as well. And also a quality, basically quality enhancement in general. And we came up with all these questions and a whole matrix based on not only these institutional program outcomes, but also the state competencies as well. We had state competencies in Virginia on reading and writing and oral competition, communication and quantitative thinking and all kinds of things like that. So we had to map those to the statewide expectations as well. So I have examples of those, and I'm very willing to share with you practical examples of courses being accepted and certified and how that was done, and also our curriculum maps for each course based not only on the institution, but also the state, the program, and the class, and the very classroom assessments.
Okay. Thank you, Charles. And Norm, if you have a couple of minutes to chat a little bit about how to help everybody center down into what they're thinking about in terms of mapping with their courses.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Yeah, this essentially all of our courses exist in this giant web, and so what I want to talk about are the questions that you have to ask to locate them inside of the web of student experience and assessment. Just a very brief history of how I got into this, but it's, I think, pertinent to all of you. In 2009, when tuning first began in the United States, my department was engaged in it, but it was kind of interesting. And then we got a dean who decided that we were going to have a purely quantitative assessment for every degree. And we as historians said, we can't do that. You know, that's not the way we think. So we were forced then to articulate what it was that we wanted to assess in our courses. And when we got into that conversation, we began to see that the power of tuning was that you could identify what the outcomes of the degree might be. And that led us into the degree qualification profile. In your packet, you'll find a thing that says DQP, Faculty and Degree Qualifications Profile, Questions of Learning, which is an extended form of what I'm going to talk about here. Because in essence, what happens when you start this process of saying, what does the history major guarantee that a student knows, understands, and can do? You've got to work backwards from there, because it does require reverse engineering just completely. So we start with, where do you begin the map? I think you begin the map at the end. That is, this is what the history degree, the whole history degree does. And you begin to work back through the levels of interaction as course builds on course, experience builds on experience. Because not everything you're going to map has to do directly with your own curriculum. It may have to do with the general education curriculum. It may have to do with the fact that your department expects them to take a foreign language, and that kind of, you know, that adds something to it. But you're building this I don't know, what's the right, a tinker toy set, or it all sticks together. But at the bottom, of course, you're starting with the question of who takes your course. What is your course for? Who comes through the door in your class? And that's really important. And all the work that the AHA has done with the Gardner Institute on things like equity and retention points at this as well. If we don't ask who it is that's taking the course, we're going to start in the wrong place, usually, because make assumptions about what they might know and be able to do that aren't right. We need to know, what is their level of preparation? Can they read, right, Charles? That's an important question. have they ever written an essay like anything like what you're asking them to do? So you have to understand who's in the class. Then you have to ask yourself, well, what's this class for? Most of us got our curriculum because we inherited it. You know, I walked through the door and they said, here, teach Western Civ. What do I know about Western Civ? I took it once. Okay, I'll start there. That's what I know about what should be in Western Civ. But if you ask yourself, well, why are we teaching Western Civ or World Civ or US Civ or anything else? Then you've got this question of who are my students, and I've got the question of why, and now we've got how do we get this group to achieve the outcomes of the course. But the outcomes of the course relate to the outcomes of the rest of the curriculum. If your student is a history major or a history minor, there's something you expect them to take from your course into the degree. They've learned to read sources, they've learned to write a 5-paragraph essay, whatever it is that you want. But you've also got to ask, is there something else going on in the course? Almost all of us who teach surveys in the lower division are also participating in general education. But general education is a different curriculum than history. It does different things. So are you able to do what history wants and do what general education wants? Or do you have to, as many people discover, you say, well, this is a general education course because the history major needs something different. So you begin to see the divisions, depending on who the students are. Most students taking your lower division course for general education are taking it because they were forced to take it. Thank heavens they forced them to take it because it keeps us enrolled. But if they're forced to take it, they don't want to be there. That's not the same person as the person who wants to be a history major. So we've got to think about what is the role of the course in the major, what is the role of the course in general education, and if you're teaching all the students in the institution, where should they be coming out? If this is their only shot at any history, what should that shot have in it? What's going to make them that liberally educated person that we all desire? So you start asking these questions about the course and about your role in the course, about the outcomes of the course and how the course relates to the other courses that they're taking. And that, of course, leads you eventually to the degree outcome, but it also, for most of our students, doesn't lead to the history degree outcome. It leads to the university's degree outcomes. And you notice Alverno's set, and I think that's a pretty standard thing, that they're all pretty big and broad. But we also, as historians, can say, well, if people are taking history, they are learning these things of the university's goals from the courses that we take. How do we know that? That's the hard question. And so assessment becomes really important here, and assessment from real artifacts. That is, you can't just say, I know I taught them to think critically. You have to show how you taught them to think critically and how that relates to the next attempt to teach them to think critically. Because one of the things you've got to do is help them be placed. That is, I took the 1000 level course. I'm now ready to take this 2000 or 3000 level course because of what I got here. And eventually it all snowballs together to turn into a degree. But we have to, when we look at our courses, always ask who's in them. What are the outcomes of the course? How do the outcomes of the course relate to the various kinds of goals that our students are going to be expected to meet in the end? And so the map becomes also the assessment tool. We want this outcome. How do we know they got that outcome? How do we know that that outcome is being expanded? Now, how often do they get asked, not in just in your course, but in other courses, to do various things in order to produce that kind of an outcome? So that's what we're going to be doing. And one other point, and I think we've included that in the packet as well. I've just recently done a study of the use of history in general education that came out in Perspectives. And that's kind of mind-boggling, depressing, and exciting all at the same time. Everybody wants this, but we haven't been really good at explaining why they should want us. That's what Charles's institution is doing, is giving history a chance to prove why they should all take history. But we need to be ready to do that. And the mapping prepares you for that argument, to say, this is what we're doing, this is how we know we did it. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Wonderful. this is really where we're going to stop right and break up into our smaller groups so that we can continue the conversation and take a look at what mapping means to us in our different areas. So I think we're pretty much ready